We want to be respectful of time. We've got until about 1 o'clock Mountain Standard scheduled. I said this a moment ago, this is Kevin Williams from DreamSpring. I was pretty heavily involved in setting up our Paycheck Protection Program early on, and I've been overseeing our forgiveness process as well and getting things set up there. So today we've got some important updates we wanted to pass along. I will start by saying this, that from myself and from the organization, to all the folks who've joined so far, we hope that you're doing well. We hope that this year has had good moments for you, as in addition to the many challenges a lot of us have faced. We hope that you and your business are able to get to a point where you're operating and you're starting to move back towards a healthier future. As I introduced myself just a moment ago, my role at the organization, I'm our SBA senior loan officer, and so the Paycheck Protection Program is kind of fallen under my purview. Also is today we have Rachel Burgoyne. Rachel, you want to introduce yourself briefly?
Sure. My name is Rachel, and I'm the lending team manager based out of Tucson, Arizona. I am really excited that we have so many participants here today. I put this in the chat box already, but if you would like a copy of this PowerPoint after the presentation, just email Kevin. I put his email address in the chat as well, and he'll send you a copy. We also have asked that everyone put their questions that come up during the presentation in the chat function so that we don't have too many folks trying to speak during the presentation. We've got, at this point, about 100 people on, so we are going to just make sure that people use the chat function instead of, again, breaking in. So I think someone said, I can't hear you. In that case, I think you'll need to just turn the volume on your computer or your phone, because I think everyone else can hear me okay.
Yeah, Rachel, do you want to respond to them in the chat? Because I ran into this webinar a few weeks ago where someone couldn't hear me, and I explained how to change that audibly, recognizing that they probably couldn't hear that as well. So,
sure. And I'll just also reiterate real quick that for folks who want to copy the presentation, you just need to send a quick email to Kevin, because this chat function will not be recorded with the actual video presentation. So if you want the copy of the presentation, make sure just to send Kevin a quick email.
Yeah, and I'll get my email out later as well, but it's just kwilliams@dreamspring.org. Williams is spelled just the normal, very generic way for that. But we're gonna dive in. I'd say for a lot of folks, we'll be going through questions throughout this, so you can ask questions in the chat box, but I'd actually encourage you to wait till the end. I have kind of tried to structure this presentation around addressing a lot of the common questions we've been hearing. As we did around 2,500 PPP loans, I've just been keeping track of what folks are asking our client services team, and we're going to try and take care of some of the more prominent questions. So one of the first topics I want to address actually is this idea of, okay, why did we wait to begin processing forgiveness applications? A lot of folks are probably aware that the SBA launched forgiveness applications in July and started accepting them in August. And we had a lot of questions from people coming in, okay, why aren't you guys having this? Where can I apply? And our mentality there was actually really to follow the SBA. So I have a lot of good contacts at the SBA that we are regularly in conversation with. And the SBA made the choice to begin receiving applications in August. However, during that time, they were not reviewing them. And so they gave people the ability to send them in, but they weren't spending staff time on reviewing them. And that's because the SBA actually believed that changes were coming. So from their perspective, they didn't want to allocate thousands of hours, tens of thousands of hours of staff time to looking at applications that maybe would need to be changed or wouldn't need to be reviewed altogether, because there's been this idea of blanket forgiveness that's been talked about regularly. So the SBA wasn't reviewing applications, and so we decided to kind of follow their lead, and instead of just stacking up paperwork for them, wait to see if there are going to be changes that were coming. And there actually were some substantive revisions that happened in August, and we'll dive into that a bit today. Also, another piece is that most clients, or I guess many clients, needed their Q3 941. So if you're not sure what a 941 is, it probably means that's not what you're filing, but that's essentially you reporting to the IRS your payroll taxes. And for a lot of clients, especially if you have a larger loan, you're going to need to provide those, and a Q3 941 isn't going to be available until mid-October either way. But then first and foremost, it's been a big priority for me and for our team that we want to design a good program. A lot of people early on when PPP launched, it was a frustrating application experience. You maybe tried to go to your bank. You might even tried to work with us initially and just ran into roadblocks as the systems were not well designed. There were a lot of questions that were coming up from people. And we really want to make sure that when we did have a forgiveness platform available, that it was well designed, it was easy for users, it was intuitive. And so we've taken the time to build that, and we're excited to say that we think we have a good path forward there and are going to be starting to receive forgiveness applications here. So there are a lot of questions that people ask about the forgiveness timeline. And what I mean by that is just the overview of what does it look like from start to finish for a forgiveness application. So the first step is DreamSpring, meaning us. We provide the client, meaning you, with an application. So applications can be sent out via email, and I'll explain that in a later slide, that why we've gone that method and why we feel like that's going to be such an effective method. But the client, meaning you, the business owner, fills in the application and uploads documentation. So we're clearly outlining what documents are going to be required by the SBA, because the next step, DreamSpring reviews the submitted application. So the SBA has been actually a little bit more vague than I would like in saying that we are actually not required to review all of these applications. And what that means is, especially for the new 3508S form, they tell us just to get it from the client, send it over to them. We are actually going to be reviewing those applications, because what I want to personally avoid is that we send in an application that's not filled out correctly, that maybe someone who was well-intentioned just didn't quite understand the rules, and we send it into the SBA and that forgiveness request is denied. So one of our goals is to make sure that applications are filled in correctly, that they're done within SBA compliance, because worst case scenario for you, the next step, the SBA reviews the application, issues a decision, and this can take up to 90 days, which is a substantial amount of time. Our goal is during the initial review, which we'll do a maximum of 30 days. Internally, we're aiming for much faster than that. I'm hopeful for a 1 to 2 week turnaround time there, but we'll see what volume does. If we get 1,000 applications in a week, it might take up to 30 days. We want to make sure that once we give the SBA that application, because they take up to 90 days, that we give them something that's correct, that they're able to issue a correct decision on and issue the correct amount of forgiveness for you, and there's no revisions that are necessary. At that point, once the SBA has forgiven your application, DreamSpring, meaning us, will contact the client, you, regarding the forgiveness decision. We'll let you know what amount was forgiven, and then if you have a loan balance, we'll let you know what that remaining balance is. At that time, if you have a balance where, let's say, you're left over with a couple $1,000s, we'd give you repayment options for that, and you'd be able to either, if you feel like it, you can just pay it off and get off your books. You can also pay it off over the remainder of your term, which for a lot of folks will be around 48 months. So I did the math on this. If you had a $1,000 balance left over, it's about an $18 per month payment, which is fairly minimal. We are hopeful that a lot of clients will be eligible for full forgiveness, and that repayment cycle will be easy or very minimal. So that's the overall timeline. So it looks like the SBA technically says up to 150 days. We're aiming to make it faster than that, and we will largely be dependent on them for the response times, though. One of the main questions we see repeatedly is, when should I apply? And this is a hard question for me to answer. The reason being is that this has a lot to do with your preferences and where you're at with this, and also your loan size. So for a lot of clients, it's hard because I feel like they're looking for an objective answer, and there really isn't a correct time to apply. Your deadline to apply is roughly 14 months after you got your funds. And if you're going to check my math and read the SBA guidance, it's technically a little bit longer than that. It's about 15 months, but I'm rounding down to make sure that we have enough time to review things internally, because the worst case scenario is someone applies right before the deadline but doesn't do it correctly the first time. So for example, the way to think about this is, if you got your funding in June of 2020, you have until August of 2021 to apply. So about 14 months later, if you were in April of 2020, you'd have until about June of 2021 to apply. So there's a fairly decent runway ahead of all of our clients, because the earliest folks were funded in April, later folks were funded in August. So that's the total time you'd have to apply. And the hard thing about when to apply is this idea of, okay, is it possible the SBA still changes some of their rules? And I always feel that it's hard making decisions when there are variables that can change, when someone might, external to yourself, make forgiveness easier or make it a little bit more broad, for example. I've heard some worry from different clients that maybe forgiveness will become harder with time. And I'm very convinced that the SBA, if they do anything, will make the process easier for clients. We don't expect to see any constrictions emerging where you need more documents, you're eligible for less. If anything, we expect it to go the opposite way and become easier. So within that, I'd say that if you're someone where if you're worrying about your loan, you're worrying about having it forgiven, it might be good to apply earlier just so it's not something that's keeping you up at night. Because for me, at least, one of the things I've personally felt a little bit of responsibility on is as we've had stressed clients that have been contacting us just worried about if they'll be eligible for forgiveness, I just want to make sure that we're doing everything we can to alleviate that. So if it's something you're worried about, you can apply soon. We're also expecting that larger requests are less likely to have substantive changes to the forgiveness process. And so there was this idea that there might be blanket forgiveness at some point, meaning that every loan, the way it was initially chatted about in August was maybe every loan under $150,000 would be automatically forgiven as long as the client signed a form saying they used the funds in an appropriate manner, and it'd be very easy. That number has shifted a little bit. The most recent discussions the SBA was having was for every loan request under $50,000 to be automatically forgiven. And so what I'm taking from that is we still think that's possible in the future. The SBA is really relying on Congress for that. And with the election coming up, we're not expecting those changes to happen in the short-term future. And we actually think it's less likely that larger loans in general see substantive changes. So for example, if you have a $160,000 PPP loan, largely the process will likely remain the same for you now as it would be in April. For someone that's got a $20,000 PPP loan, it's a little bit more likely that changes will happen. Unfortunately, those are variables that are outside of our control and my control, and so I can't predict exactly what will happen. I do think it's possible that once there's a new session of the Senate, and potentially next February or March, there could be some changes that would happen because I do think that there's an appetite for it by all parties involved. And so blanket forgiveness is still this possibility. And so for a lot of folks, I think it would not be a bad decision at all to make sure that you have your documentation in order. But especially if you're a smaller request, wait until next April before you put your application in, and we'll be monitoring the changes and putting those out to you as well. Within that, if you'd like to apply now is also a fine time as well. Another question is regarding what the application is going to look like. So the SBA now has 3 versions of the application. So there's the 3508 that was issued in June, their 3508EZ that I believe came out in July, and the 3508S that came out in mid-October. And so what we're doing are actually we're going to be building web-based applications for the 3508EZ and the 3508S. The reason we're doing just those 2 forms, we believe about 99% of our clients will fall into one of those 2 categories. So the EZ or the S are pretty broad, and so we're building a really simplified application process for those folks. We are not accepting paper documents or PDFs of the SBA documents. I've got a lot of questions about this, and it's been pretty common that someone will download the SBA application online and send it over to one of our loan officers. There are a few reasons behind why we're not accepting those. First and foremost is that, unfortunately, I think I've seen an inordinate amount of typos or forms that are not filled in correctly. Our web-based forms, what they're going to do is actually pre-fill all the information that we have. So for example, it's going to be a unique link for you. It's going to fill in your loan number. It's going to fill in your loan amount. It's going to fill in the disbursement date. It's going to automatically calculate a lot of things for you. So it's going to make it a very easy process. It's also going to make sure that things are accurate because, like we were talking about, what we want to avoid is sending applications over to the SBA only to have them be rejected because maybe there's a digit that was wrong in a loan number just from a typo. And so paper documents, the other issue is, one of my complaints with how the SBA has designed this system, I don't know if anyone else has noticed this or caught it, but there's the form itself. So for the 3508S, for example, you can download the application online. If you want to get the instructions for the form, it's actually a separate link that you need to go to, and then you download the instructions that tell you how to fill out the form. The problem there being is that because you have to go to a separate source to get your information, it makes it way more often that people are filling those out incorrectly. So we've probably received about 10 3508S's that are just paper or filled in PDFs. And unfortunately, I have not seen one that's been filled in correctly yet. So our web-based application is going to make that all much easier. And it's going to help us keep everything organized, especially as documents are being uploaded. Another really common question is, which application do I fill out? The 3508S will essentially apply to all loans under $50,000. There are a handful of things that you need to sign an initial saying essentially, yes, I've used the funds appropriately. Yes, I was eligible for this originally, but it really should be fairly broad for all loans under $50,000. 3508EZ is a slightly more complicated form. The S version, I think, takes about 2 minutes to fill out. The EZ, maybe 5 to 7. It's for loans of over $50,000 in which the average pay of employees was not reduced to less than 75% of their previous months, and that you were able to retain your FTE counts. And so an important thing to note is we've had a lot of clients asking, oh, I had an employee that quit, refused to return to work, or was fired for cause. Am I still able to fill out the 3508EZ? And the answer is actually yes, that you can. The SBA is asking that you retain in your records documentation of what happened. And so, for example, if you had an employee that you had to let go in April, and then after you got the PPP loan, you sent them you offered to let them come back to work, you are actually still eligible for the EZ form. Another way you can be eligible for the EZ is if CDC guidance does not allow your business to operate. So, for example, if there were local health restrictions that put into effect that meant that your restaurant couldn't operate at the same level and you didn't have the same staffing needs, what you would need to do is actually be able to show that that local restriction was connected to CDC guidance, that you were not able to operate as a result of that, and then that's a justification that you are still eligible for the EZ. The full version, the 3508, just the normal one, is for loans over $50,000 that reduced their employees' wages or FTE. And so you reduced FTE in a way that did not fall into one of the exemptions that the 3508EZ covers, or you reduced employees' wages past 75% of their previous compensation. The way you'd figure that out is essentially looking at if an employee's average wage hourly was $12 an hour previous to the pandemic, you need to pay them at least $9 an hour during the pandemic. For a salaried employee, you'd look at their average monthly compensation. Did they retain 75% of that? So we believe that most clients will be eligible for 3508S or the EZ. There are some exceptions that will happen where we'll need to do the regular 3508, and that'll be filled on the SBA PDF forms. If you have questions about this, Rachel did put my email up earlier, but it's just, once again, kwilliams@dreamspring.org. You can bounce things over there, and I'll try and be as responsive as possible. So this is an example of what the web-based application will look like. So this is from the 3508S, and it asks number of employees at time of loan application. So how many employees did you have when you applied back in April or May? Number of employees at time of forgiveness application, which is essentially saying how many employees do you have now? Idle advance amount, which is if you received an idle advance, which is those increments of $1,000 to $10,000 in increments of 1,000. If you received that, you put in that number there. You can see that's actually not a mandatory question. There's the little red star that's in the upper corner that marks a mandatory question. It says if you did not receive an idle advance, put 0. Idle application number, it's only if you had an idle loan. And then the forgiveness amount that you're requesting. So it's just saying, okay, how much of your loan would you like to have forgiven? And you need to be able to show that with documentation. So for the 3508S, these are actually all the questions you have to answer. The rest of the form is filled in for you. And so I said about a 2-minute process. So as long as you know how many employees you had, how many you have currently, and the forgiveness amount you're requesting, those are the 3 questions that are required for all borrowers filling out a 3508S. You do need to upload documentation, which is the second step of this, but it should be fairly straightforward. The EZ application, I believe, has about 10 boxes that you need to fill in as opposed to the 5. So fairly straightforward there once again. We're really working to make this a simplified process for you. So this is just a screenshot. The full application will have a little bit more information on it. I'm I'm going to address some common issues really quick that I've seen as people are filling out applications. We've had a number of folks. We did run about 20 or 25 people through the electronic application. We just randomly selected some people and invited them to apply. This was before the forms were pre-filling, and so if you were one of those folks and you're on the call and you're asking, why do I have to fill out so much extra information? It's unfortunately just that we built the system out a little bit more since then. Your application will still be processed just as normal. You just had to do an extra couple minutes of data entry there. So not providing correct supporting documentation is one of the issues we've seen. So within the application, it's going to tell you what you're going to be required to upload. It's going to be giving you very clear guidance. And so, for example, a 3508EZ, a pretty common combo is a payroll record and a corresponding 941 that supports that. For the 3508S, it's really common that you'll just need your tax return. So if you file a Schedule C, or you'll need either that or third-party payroll process records or IRS 941s and payroll records. So the forms very clearly outline this. So I just encourage everyone just to take a minute, see what it's asking for from you. We've had some people just upload like a photo of their dog or something like that, and well, that's great. That doesn't make you eligible for forgiveness. And in that instance, we would reach back out to you and say, hey, here's what we need. An important note there, if you do provide something that's not correct, we're not going to just decline your application, but we will reach out to you and correct it before submitting to the SBA because we want to make sure that your loan is eligible for full forgiveness. Another common issue are typos, people putting in incorrect EINs, loan numbers, things like that. And so part of why we've gone to the auto-filling forms is because we have your loan number on file, we have your EIN on file, we might as well enter it for you and make sure there are no mistakes there. And then another issue we've seen come up regularly is when folks just don't understand the questions being asked. So this is less common for the 3508S. It's just those 5 very basic questions. We've been building out the application, trying to provide clarification on different issues. So one I saw pop up in the chat a moment ago was asking if the idle advance should be deducted from what you're requesting for forgiveness. So for example, do you take that idle advance out of your forgiveness request before submitting it? The answer is no. You can request the full amount for forgiveness and the SBA will reduce that later. So that's one example. And we're working on all these forms to provide answers to these common questions. And as folks call in and ask, we're actually going in and adjusting the forms to make sure that commonly asked questions are within the form. So if you don't understand something, start by looking within the form itself, look through the instructions. But if you come to a point where you just don't know how to move forward, reach out to our team, we'll get it taken care of for you. More frequently asked questions. What happens to funds that are not forgiven? So funds that are not forgiven are repaid over the remaining term of the loan. So it's at a 1% interest rate, so a really low interest rate. But essentially, if you had an idle advance of $3,000, and so you're left over with a $3,000 loan balance at the end, you'd be paying off a $3,000 loan over the remaining length of the term, which is originally for all clients was 60 months. And so it just depends on when you receive your forgiveness. It might be on average about a 48-month repayment cycle. If you'd like to, if you just don't want to have a $3,000 loan you have to remember to pay, even though we do have automatic payments available, I would probably just prefer to not have to worry about that every month. You can just make a prepayment on that and just get it off your books. Another common question is, can having an idle advance reduce the amount of forgiveness my loan is, reduce the amount of my loan that's forgiven? And the answer is yes, an idle advance will reduce your forgiveness. As I said this a moment ago, the SBA, I think this is an area where they need to provide some good clarifications for both lenders and borrowers because the idle advance, when folks are filling out that form, it was very clear to not need to be repaid. What the SBA is doing is you'll submit your forgiveness application. Let's say you requested $20,000 of forgiveness and you're eligible for that, but you've gotten $1,000 for an idle advance, then you will essentially receive $19,000 of forgiveness. So it will come off that. This is one area where we've, as an organization, been pressing the SBA to make some changes. We're slightly hopeful Congress might make some changes. That's out of our control. We don't feel like it's always fair that the idle advance is being reduced from forgiveness because at the time of idle applications, that wasn't clear. And the SBA actually did not even provide full clarity on that until August of this year. So that is one area where if blanket forgiveness did happen, let's say in March, there's been discussions about having changes into how idle is handled at that time. Are we certain of that? No, but that's a variable that is up in the air. I'm going to move quickly as I know we're getting closer to time here. We will go a few minutes after just to make sure that we answer questions. But another question we've been getting, people are asking if they should work with a broker to help get their forgiveness request ready. I give a pretty substantive no for that. The reason being, we've seen a lot of businesses cropping up where someone's offering to help with PPP, be it for applications and now for forgiveness, and they're charging clients a fee for that. We are more than happy to help you with that. There's no reason you need to pay a fee externally for that. There's no reason you need to work with someone like that. It's a pretty easy process. If you have extra questions, you can actually talk to your local SBDC as well. They've got good resources. Another question is, what happens if things change after I apply for forgiveness and my qualifications have expanded? So this is this fear from folks that, okay, if I apply now and let's say you apply in November, your forgiveness decision is issued by the SBA in December, and you've got a little loan balance left over. We're not certain on this, but we believe there'd likely be a process where you need to apply again, and you then received expanded forgiveness. So the SBA did something like this initially for clients that were eligible for more than they were officially funded for, and so they could come back and almost get an additional waive, and it was a very unique circumstance where it applied. But let's say you received a $20,000 loan, you applied for $20,000 of forgiveness, but you only received $19,000 because your idle advance was taken back, and you've got a $1,000 repayment left with us. If at that point the SBA did change their rules, they would probably let you be eligible for that additional forgiveness. You'd probably have to fill out an extra form, I'm guessing. That's possible. And then they would also probably require us to refund you for any payments that have been made. So it gets kind of complicated, but if things change, they tend to provide workflows for things to be rectified. That is part of why I've expressed that if I were a smaller loan application, I might wait to apply just because things get a little bit messier there, but recognize there would be a workflow. Another really common question is, my payroll is greater than my loan amount, should I claim other expenses? When they changed this from essentially having 8 weeks of eligibility to 24, they didn't change the amount people were qualifying for. So my understanding has been that essentially any business that wants to should be able to only show payroll expenses and be eligible for full forgiveness. So for example, if you file a Schedule C return, you can likely just provide your Schedule C. That's all the documentation that's necessary. If you're a business with 10 employees, if you provide, let's say, 13 weeks of payroll records, that's more than sufficient. All you need to do is show equal expenses to your loan amount, and I've encouraged people to take the path of least resistance, which often involves just doing payroll because that's simpler than saying, okay, I'll do some payroll, I'll get this interest-only mortgage payment, I'll get these utility payments. You might as well make it easy on yourself, and if everything's eligible through payroll, just file it through payroll. That should be all that's necessary. Another frequently asked question, this is just the way the SBA designed this form. And after this, we're going to be moving to some of the questions that have been showing up in the chat. So if you have one, you can pop it in there. And this is line 7 of the 3508 Easy calculating incorrectly? The answer is no. The way the SBA designed this form, the SBA form is on the right. And you can see line 7, it's highlighted, it says payroll cost 60% requirement. It's telling you to divide line 1 by 0.6. So that means they want you to divide your payroll cost by 0.6. If you look over on the left, you can see an example that I've done with this with our form that automatically fills this out, where it's essentially taking your $10,000 of payroll, dividing by 0.6, and it shows $16,000. That's the way the form's supposed to work. It is correct. That is all right. You actually want that number to be higher, so ideally line 7's high. Funny enough, I've tried to explain this to a few staff members internally. It's always a little bit confusing. Just if you get confused by that, recognize that the form is doing the math for you correctly. That's just the way the SBA decided to get to that answer. Really quickly, I forgot I had one more slide here. So what should you be doing now? Let's keep good records. You can apply when you like. These applications will be emailed out over the next few weeks. So each client's going to have their own unique link. We're going to be emailing these out in waves. If you would like yours immediately, meaning you don't want to wait a week for it, you can contact myself or client experience team, and they'll provide that for you. They're all prepared. We're doing that in batches just because we want to make sure that we don't have our small client services team getting calls from 2,500 applicants all on the same day. We prefer just to spread that out slightly. So if you really want to apply, let's say tomorrow, contact us, we'll get that over to you. But these will be sent out over the next few weeks. The link, why that matters, is it attaches that to your application. It makes our submission process for the SBA really easy, and it pre-fills all your information, which is nice because it gets rid of typos and makes sure that we have fewer questions from folks. Businesses should apply now. Only other two things I'll say: if you're going to sell your business soon, or you need to let employees go in the next couple weeks, reach out to me by email, explain, but you should probably plan on applying sooner. You should not sell your business and then apply. It's better if you need to let employees go that you apply now as well. All right, so we're finally on the question side. I know that there are going to be a lot coming in from folks. If we don't get to it today, we'll probably spend, I think, until about 1:10 on the call after here, going through some of these. If there are additionals that we need to get to, we can follow up by email on those later. So Rachel, do you want to just let me know a couple of the most common ones? I'm actually not able to see all the questions coming through.
Yeah, so I'm going to do my best to try and start, according to the earlier questions and proceed from there, keeping in mind that some of them I'm kind of consolidating common themes. So one of the, common questions that I'll just kind of answer off the bat, a lot of folks are asking about when they can apply. You can apply really at any time now. We would just encourage you, if you can, to wait for a few weeks, again, when we actually email you the link to follow. But again, if it's more urgent and it falls in one of the categories that Kevin discussed where you want to apply sooner than later, make sure to just reach out to our client service team. Question: there has been accruing interest on my loan. Will that be forgiven as well?
I can answer that one. So the SBA will forgive any interest that's accrued as well. So the one thing that's a little bit of nuance there is, let's say you're left with a $2,000 balance. You would have a 1% interest rate on that $2,000 accrued over the lifetime of the loan. That's going to come out to be a couple dollars. It's not a lot. That's the way the SBA designed the system. And so the lion's share of interest and any amount that's forgiven is covered by the SBA, though, automatically. You do not include that in your forgiveness calculation, though. They will do that on their end, and we'll do that on our end, just letting that all be removed.
Great. Next question, and I'm going to kind of group two questions or two categories of questions together because they're related. There seems to be a little bit of confusion around the relationship between EIDL loans and PPP loans. So maybe start by describing the difference between those, and then folks were asking about if there'd be a similar presentation for EIDL loans.
Yeah, so EIDL, the confusing thing for a lot of folks is that EIDL was distributed directly by the SBA. Our organization is not the SBA. We're a nonprofit that is in Albuquerque. Rachel lives in Arizona. I live in Denver. But so we are a third party. And so we were issuing the PPP loans on behalf of the SBA. EIDL, unfortunately, I am not able to see if a client has an EIDL loan. We don't have access to that. That's if you applied for that separately. EIDL, there are two different programs. There's the EIDL Advance and the EIDL loan itself. The EIDL Advance was an increment of $1,000 to $10,000. So for example, if you got $13,100, that is not an EIDL Advance. EIDL loans are repaid back over either 15 or 30 years, and that's a separate SBA product. I know a bit about that program. I'd actually encourage you to reach out to the SBA with questions about your specific EIDL loan. If you have questions about the EIDL Advance, that interacts with PPP. That's what we were talking about a moment ago, that the SBA looks at that and they say, okay, that's part of your PPP forgiveness that you just already received, which came out as an answer from them in August to some questions. So I know there's been a lot of confusion from folks on that. And that is something we've kind of tried to press the SBA on to get some clarification. And so far they've been fairly quiet.
Thank you. Next question. On the 3508S, my company is just myself, no employees. Do I count as one employee?
Yeah, so the FTE calculation, if you are a sole proprietor, single member LLC, you just count as one. If you have employees, the way this works, you have two different ways you can count it on either form. Employees that are full-time, the simplest way of doing it is employees that are full-time are 1, employees that are half-time, meaning less than 32 hours per week, are 0.5. You can also do this by 0.1, meaning for every 4 hours per week an employee works on average, they get 0.1. So you can have an employee that is at, let's say, 0.4, meaning they work, got gosh, I'm doing this bad in my head. Yeah, you get the point with this, that you could essentially break it down that way, as a lot of folks do. So.
So the next question, and this is kind of a follow-up question from your previous one that you answered. Do you subtract the EIDL from the loan amount, thus decreasing the forgiveness amount? So maybe again, that was kind of addressed already, but just address the do you subtract it from the loan amount question.
Correct. Yeah. And so there's another question I see in the chat that I'll respond to right now as well. So the EIDL advance that we're talking about, the SBA in some of their literature did talk about it being a grant, which is part of what we've been pressing on a little bit. And so that you do not reduce that from your forgiveness amount. The SBA will do that automatically on their end. So for example, if you think you're eligible for $20,000 of forgiveness, but you got $1,000 for EIDL, if you were to just request $19,000, you're actually only going to receive $18,000, which is part of why we're going to be reviewing all these applications, just to make sure that we want to make sure people are eligible for as much as possible.
And then someone asked basically if they don't have an EIDL, they should just ignore that. That's correct. If you don't have an EIDL, then don't worry about any of this. Can you just briefly describe the process for someone who is a sole prop, how they would apply?
Yeah, so for a sole proprietor, you'll get your link in your email. You'll click on that. It's going to fill in all the information. You'll have those 5 boxes that we showed earlier. And what that'll be is you'll enter how many employees you had at the time of application, which you'll put 1. How many employees you have now, you'll put 1 again. Within that, you'll enter the amount you're claiming for forgiveness, which for a sole proprietor, as long as you're providing your tax return, claim full forgiveness. So whatever your loan amount was, if you got $10,000, you'll just ask for $10,000 of forgiveness. You'll upload your tax return, you'll sign the form, and you're good to go. It really should be a very fast process for a lot of folks.
Next question, if you pay off your loan balance in full early, will there be a prepayment penalty?
Good question. Absolutely not. Yeah, we are not going to charge anyone additional fees. In a lot of ways, it's helpful if folks want to make a prepayment. So we're thankful for that. So no penalties there. It'd save you that 1% interest over a couple years, but it's just whatever's going to work best for you there.
Next question. Will we be eligible for a new loan when new stimulus bill or a new stimulus bill has been approved and signed by the federal government?
That's a good question. There's been a lot of speculation there regarding what the next round of, will there be second PPP? And a lot of the discussions I've seen both within Congress and within SBA internally has been it'd be more of a nuanced program, meaning that it's not everyone who's eligible. As we're starting to recognize that the coronavirus outbreak and the recession that we're seeing right now is not impacting businesses evenly. So for example, a restaurant might be seeing more of an impact than a lot of other industries. And so there's been a conversation about having it targeted towards some industries. They may also decide that they would just prefer to have it be open to everyone again. So that's uncertain. I think in a lot of ways, we will need to wait and see what Congress passes and what the exact bill looks like.
Next question, will we, DreamSpring, be issuing a Form 1099 to the borrowers, PPP borrowers, for the amount of the loan forgiveness?
So it's different. It's a 1099-C that is issued to the borrower. So that is not recorded as income. And so what's different is the 1099-C is a cancellation of debt. And so essentially what's happening is you will not need to claim this as either as gross income for your business. We are being required by the IRS to issue those, I believe, once a borrower has received forgiveness. So for example, if you wait until February, you wouldn't see that until late 2021. The SBA has been consistent, luckily, on saying that the PPP loan is not taxable, meaning you do not need to see it as income, even once that 1099-C is issued, which is why that's different than a normal 1099.
Cool. Next question, I'll just answer really quick. Is EIDL advance different from a PPP loan? yes, they are different, but they interact with each other when it comes to how much you're eligible for forgiveness. Next question, don't you have to show additional expenses to cover the EIDL loan?
Yeah, that's the complicated bit here. So the EIDL is what we're seeing a lot of questions about, and that's because the SBA referred to as an advance in some of the literature, a grant in others. What SBA reps and what we were telling some folks in June was that as long as you showed enough eligible expenses to cover both your PPP loan and your EIDL advance, you should be eligible for full forgiveness. The SBA, when they launched their forgiveness portal in August, the system they decided upon was that essentially when your forgiveness decision is issued, the way this works is we've technically funded your loan right now, and so if you got $20,000, that was from DreamSpring's funds. When the SBA issues a forgiveness decision, they send us a wire in the amount of the forgiveness you've received, and so they will send us whatever increment that is. If it's, I'm going to continue using my same numbers. So if you'd applied for $20,000 forgiveness for a $20,000 loan and you received $1,000 from EIDL, they will wire us $19,000. That's not the way we've been led to believe it would function, and that's been a point of contention for most lenders, I believe. It's interesting. I participate in a network of CDFIs, which are organizations like DreamSpring, and there's been a lot of confusion as the SBA issued their first couple of forgiveness decisions in mid-October, and a lot of lenders were confused about why the amounts were coming in lower, and they'd often miss that October change in rules. And so that's why there's been some frustration on our half, and especially on the behalf of clients there.
Next question, when you submit payroll records for PPP loan forgiveness, do you just include, or do you include payroll taxes or just the wages?
You are taking gross income. So it's not the payroll taxes that you pay, those are separate, but gross pay to employees, sorry, that's the best way of putting it. So if whatever federal or state taxes are coming out of it, that's still able to be included though.
Do you need to report the amount you're forgiven as income on your 2020 taxes?
You do not. Cindy had put in the chat, it looks like as well. It's not income. You are, however, so for example, if you used the PPP loan for some eligible expenses or for wages, for example, you cannot consider those a write-off though. So you can't write off those expenses. So it's almost like it exists in its own pool over there. It's not income. Any of the expenses covered by it are no longer seen as expenses in your taxes either. I'd encourage everyone, hopefully you've got a good accountant that you're working with, and I hope you'll be up to speed there.
Also, sorry, as I've gone down in the comments, apparently I am not talking loud enough for some of you. Sorry, folks. Does the person who applies for forgiveness have to be the same person who originally filled out the loan paperwork?
It does not. The email from us is going to be going to the person that is currently set up on the loan account. If you need to change that, you can contact our client services team and we can make adjustments there. Within that though, I would prefer if it was the same person. I don't think that'll cause issues with the SBA. It's ideal that it is the same. And they do need to be someone that has the ability to sign on behalf of the organization. So for example, let's say theoretically, if DreamSpring had gotten a PPP loan, I could not, as an employee, just go and sign for it. It needs to be someone that within your operating agreement has the ability to sign on behalf of the organization. So changing that and have someone that's not eligible to make that decision could cause your PPP forgiveness request to be declined by the SBA. And if you're audited in the future, that actually could become an issue. So make sure it's someone that is eligible to sign on behalf of the organization.
For the 3508S, which year's tax return should be provided?
2019.
The next question, I was told small businesses do not require any application for forgiveness. Is this true? And how small does the business have to be?
So that was something that was discussed. Unfortunately, I mentioned this. I was a little less than satisfied with the 3508S when it came out in October, because I think that confused a lot of people, because essentially it looks like a form where no documentation is required. You have to download those instructions separately to know what you need to provide with it. And so there is not a blanket forgiveness for any loan size currently. That's what we're talking about. We think that could happen later. That could be December, that could be March, or it may never happen. it's been discussed, and unfortunately, that's not something that we are able to change internally. That's the SBA rules, and we're responsible for administering the program as they've designed it.
Next question. My EIDL was termed as a grant, so $1,000 in EIDL funds. Is that what you mean by advance? The answer to that is yes. The advance and grant language has been used intermittently. It's the same thing, so you're good. A couple other folks. Oh, this is an interesting question. Should I wait to apply to see if blanket forgiveness amount is increased?
Yeah, so for me at least, I'm someone where if I was not worried about it, and I don't think anyone should be worried about this process, it is pretty straightforward. The application process is not hard. Applying early doesn't make you eligible for more forgiveness and won't be beneficial in that way. So if I was a smaller loan, and the way I'm defining smaller is anything under $50,000, I would personally probably consider waiting. Anything above $100,000 and especially above $150,000, I would probably apply when I felt like it. The one change I would make is, okay, if you are a smaller loan request, but you're worried about it right now, and it's something that provides some stress to your week, and you just don't like the idea that it's out there still, I might think about applying now, knowing that, let's say, for example, blanket forgiveness did come around and those EIDL advances were no longer being deducted, which is one of the things we've asked for. Whether the SBA does it is a different question. Then you'd probably have to reapply and do some extra paperwork at that point. So I'd say it's a personal question. If I were a smaller loan, I might personally wait. For example, waiting until March. If you got your funds in June, you technically have until August of the following year. And so you could wait until March and see if things change, and when it's convenient for you, send it over. If you were a bigger loan, I'd probably just apply when it's most convenient, when you feel like it though.
A couple folks have asked, since they had joined later, if they could get a copy of this session. Yes, we're going to send a recording out to everyone who RSVP'd on the Eventbrite page. Next question, and this came within the last 10 minutes, so after you had described this the first time, but just briefly again, describe the difference between the EIDL loan and advance. Sorry to bring it up again, but it seems like
no, that's we see that very regularly, and the SBA, I wish they'd termed and been more clear with their branding on these, honestly, where EIDL loan, EIDL advance, EIDL grant, with the advance and the grant really being the same thing. They just use those interchangeably for a season. So the loan is a term loan that's been issued by the US government, essentially. So it's a 15 or 30-year term loan that for a lot of folks is equal to about 6 months of your gross revenue. So it might be a fairly large loan you got from them. It might be 50, it might be $100,000. That is separate. The advance or grants, using those terms interchangeably, is in an increment of $1,000 to $10,000 and always a round number. So for example, it won't be $10,075. That's something that you do not need to repay. And so the SBA, the way they're getting around their language there, when you checked the box, it said, I would like to be considered for an advance of up to $10,000. This will not need to be repaid under any circumstances. They are going to be seeing that was an advance on your forgiveness. That's why they've started really harping on that language since. They're saying that was a portion of your loan forgiveness that you just received early. That would seem to go against them calling it a grant at some points. It becomes slightly confusing to me, at least. And so hence why there's been some pushback there.
Next question. I'm a sole prop, loan was under 20K. All was used as income. Is PPP loan taxable as income, or is it a loan? In other words, do I count it as separate income? I have never filed an IRS 941. Do I need to create past quarters for that type of document? And then we already addressed the tax year.
Yeah, so you would not need to create a 941 in that instance. Essentially, really similar to the documentation you provided at the time of application that let you be approved, that's what you need to have to be forgiven. So for example, for a lot of folks, if you gave us a tax return for approval, you'll need to give us a tax return for forgiveness. The one exception I'll make is, for example, a lot of folks send over like an 1120S tax returns, and that is separate. But really, if you've never filed a 941, you don't need to start doing that now. The income question, it really, weirdly enough, is not going to show up once it's forgiven as a loan either, because it's canceled debt at that point. So what that means is it's not income. it's no longer a loan, it's a 1099-C cancellation of debt. I am not a tax expert by any means. I think there's going to be some interesting questions you'll get into at the end of the year there. Essentially, let's say you were left over with a $2,000 loan balance at the end, or $1,000. At that point, you would have a loan that you could report on taxes, and that 1% of interest would be able to be claimed on your taxes for the $10 a year that's accruing on that. So,
next question: are all sole prop LLC loans automatically 100% forgiven?
That's once again the blanket forgiveness question. They are not automatically forgiven at this point. We think that's possible, like we've said repeatedly. There's been discussion of that in the SBA. The one bit of nuance I'll say, I think that the more complaints we see about fraud, especially in news stories and things like that, the less likely that blanket forgiveness comes. So that's been the back and forth, the SBA wanting to make it easy on people, but also wanting to catch fraudulent applications. And that's the tension they're seeing. So that may happen. That may be something they choose to do in the future. Right now, it's the 3508S form, which is a very simple form. It's those 5 boxes, only 3 of them being required. It can be really quick if you'd like to go through that route.
Next question: I received EIDL, paid my rent, I assume they mean business rent, for March and April. Then in May, received PPP and spent 25% of that on rent for May and June. Is that okay?
That's fine. So 60% of your loan needs to go to payroll. The additional 40% can go to these other things. You can also spend 90 or 100% of your loan on the payroll as well. So what that means for this person, if they want to show 25% towards these eligible expenses, 75% towards payroll, that's great. No issues there at all. You could also just claim only payroll. For example, if you looked further out and were able to show enough payroll, that's easy, not an issue.
Great. Next question is about documents that are needing to be provided for loan forgiveness. I'm actually just going to answer that real quick in terms of, we're not going to go over all the different types of documents for the different types of loans and entities that are out there. We'll just say that the application link that you receive in your email is going to have, it's going to be a customized link for you. So it's going to be asking you pretty specifically what you need to submit. And then if you have questions, there's going to be a way for you to contact someone and get any clarification needed. I think this is one of our final questions, maybe our last one. Most of my employees worked part-time. I thought 30 hours was full-time. So I paid the same amount out from PPP. Is that okay? So basically, it sounds like they kept their employees' times consistent throughout COVID PPP application and then after.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and what I've heard from some people is they're worried that maybe they gave the wrong number of employees in their original application based on that, and they're now worried that's going to throw up red flags. What I would do at that point is just when it asks you for employees at the time of application and at the time of forgiveness, just keep those numbers consistent, indicating that you didn't make any reductions. Don't say, for example, let's say you knew that you listed 30 when you applied in April. You don't need to reduce that to 24 now. Keep it consistent, report what it was at that point and what it is now, and just show that those are the same.
All right, and then I think the rest were just people being really nice and thanking us. So thanks to you all for your patience and on hanging in there. It's been a really interesting process. We've been trying to do our best in terms of keeping up with the SBA's different guidance and updates. We'll continue to have webinars when we've gotten to a point where we realize there's been enough changes that it merits another conversation with you all. We will send a recording to everyone again that RSVP'd for Eventbrite, so you can reference it again. We'll have it on our website, and then you can also share this webinar with any other business owners that who are really struggling to understand. Even if they didn't get a PPP loan from us, we still want to be a resource for the community. So you can share this, and again, reach out with any questions that you have. But first, go to our website too to see if there's your answer to your question there. Just in terms of, again, getting a lot of questions during this time, we're happy to help, but it is really great for us if you can check our website first so that we can get to folks whose answers aren't there. So thank you so much. Kevin, thank you for that great presentation and for all the work you've been doing on this. And everyone have a great afternoon.